Welcome to Me and Steve Talk RPG, a podcast where me and my friend Steve try and help you get the most out of your role-playing game experience.
Welcome back to Me and Steve Talk RPGs. Today we're going to be talking about a few different dice mechanics and dice systems, just to talk about different styles of dice and different style of dice games versus Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder. So as always, I'm joined by Steve.
Greetings.
So where do we want to get started? D&D and Pathfinder?
Well, I think, the basics first probably, just like most games fall into one of two categories if they use dice. In fact, they pretty much all do. It's either a roll over number or a roll under number. And all that really means is you've got what you're going to call a target number, which, say, to use Dungeons & Dragons as an example, is the armor class of the person you're trying to hit. So you're rolling and you're trying to get your target number or higher. There are games where you want to roll under your target number.
Like D&D, where you rolled to hit armor class 0.
Well, that was old D&D, and that was weird.
Yeah, well,
I mean,
I still know guys to this day. I was just talking to a guy the other day of the game store that we go to that said he still has the mathematical equation memorized for calculating THACO. And I said, you are a braver man than I.
I know someone who up until a year and a half ago was still running a 20-plus year long second edition campaign.
Oh, I would too. Up until a year and a half ago, I was running a second edition game.
Yeah, but you hadn't been playing that campaign since you were in high school and older than me.
No, I wasn't. But I was playing second edition because I didn't know that 5th edition was as good as it is. But
well, now, to my memory, your skill checks and so forth and your saves were roll under in second edition, were they not?
They were pretty much the same as they are now, where you had a modifier and you were rolling dice plus the modifier to either match or beat the difficulty. Yeah, they were in some cases roll under, so they did it a little bit differently. Because it was skill checks were still like we have now, where we have a difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
Saves, I want to say you had to roll under the number.
Okay, that's probably what I'm remembering then.
So it was, and that's sort of one of the things that I don't understand with modern D&D is that saves and skill checks are essentially the same thing.
Pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, the only difference between a save and a skill check is technically you can crit fail a save, and you can't crit fail a skill check.
Well, yeah, rules is written. That's the way that pretty much nobody plays, but...
No, I heard somebody the other day talking about, you can't crit fail a check. I'm like, yes, you can. Everybody at some point has been, getting a glass out of the cabinet and dropped it. You're not telling me that you can't crit check, you can't crit fail saves, or can't crit fail checks. You've done it. I've done it. I've tripped on my own feet. Not that my shoes were untied, just walking and tripped and fell. Well, what did you trip on? I don't know.
Hey, it happened to me the other morning coming back from lunch or something at work, walking up the steps, the outside of the building that I've walked up, I don't know how many hundreds of times, just slightly off and tripped. And they're concrete steps. They haven't changed.
Well, I did that. I was carrying the trash out last night. And we have 3 stairs in front of our house. And they're the same 3 stairs that have always been there.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way I would describe it is I rolled a 4. Because I didn't roll a 1, I didn't trip and fall, and I didn't roll I didn't do so badly that I ended up on my face. I just, misjudged the length of the step. And caught my heel and stumbled a little bit and then caught myself.
Did one of those weird spin moves and...
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, going back to where we were, you have roll over, roll under, and your target number is generally the number that is your line of demarcation, if you will.
Right.
And then the only other significant thing is that you have Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder use a single die, a d20, and you roll that and you add whatever. Some other games use what's generally referred to as a dice pool, where you may be rolling multiple dice, and there's various versions of that I think we'll get into a little bit down the road. But yeah, that's still kind of how it works. And to me, even though technically D100 is 2 dice, I consider that kind of a single dice thing, even though...
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, because D100 is, for those of you that know, that when you roll a D100, it's a D10 plus a D100. and that gives you the exact number that you're rolling.
I would say effectively it's just 2d10, and you use one for the
Right.
tens position and one for the ones. I have actually used to play with a guy that used a literal D100 that
I've seen those.
kind of looked a little bit like a golf ball, but it took it forever to settle.
Yeah, I've seen those. They take forever to settle, and they're kind of difficult to read.
Yeah, because they're small, or the numbers are small.
The best one I ever found of a D100 had 100 faces, but it was sort of like a magic 8-ball.
That would work.
Where when you rolled it, the only number that showed up on it was the number that was rolled.
I've never seen one like that. That sounds neat.
Yeah, I hadn't either, and I asked the guy where he got it, and he's like, oh, I got it at a con, and when people say stuff like that, that means I'm not telling you who I bought it from because it's my special secret thing. But it was really neat. But no, I argue that, yeah, D100, even though you're rolling 2 dice, is still 1 die. It's still one number that you're looking for. It's not 2 numbers.
Yeah. Now, different games do use it. Sometimes you may use those same numbers for something else, but to me, that's just an implementation of it to avoid having to make yet another roll. And so I don't consider D100 a dice pool. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I don't either. Versus, a standard dice pool, which is you roll maybe you have a 5 in a stat. You're going to roll 5D. Let's say it's a weird game and you roll 5D4s. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or typically it's D6s. I know with GURPS it's D6.
Yeah. Most, with the exception of the Vampire Storyteller system, most of the ones I'm aware of are D6s.
I know there's a couple that use D8s and there's a couple that use D10s, and I can't remember names of games at the moment that do that, but I know there's a couple that use those 2 particular dice.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sure when you get into some of the war games and stuff, they're also all sorts of crazy permutations.
I've played 2 war games, and of the 2 war games I've played, they're both D6s, so that's pretty standard. But,
okay.
Because Warhammer 40k is D6s, it's just you need a bucket to roll them.
Okay.
And then I played War Machine back in the day, and that was D6s.
Okay. But yeah, so like your average D&D Pathfinder is just a D20 rollover system. I mean, that's how I would define it anyway.
Right. It's match or beat, and that's all there is to it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about Palladium.
Palladium is kind of an odd one because I guess you'd call it a hybrid system because Palladium uses D100 for skills, but D20 for combat. So for your skill checks, and I will say for me, D100 is one of the easiest systems to play because to me it's very, very simple because you look at the number on your sheet and you roll the dice, and is the number on the dice lower than the number on the sheet? Okay, you did it. Or you didn't.
Mm-hmm.
It's D100 systems are almost always roll under because figuring out the math for rollover in D100 makes my head hurt. But that's also where Palladium, the skill check system is D100 roll under, combat system is D20 roll over. So it's a little bit of an odd one in a lot of ways, but they did a lot of games. I mean, years and years ago, they had the Robotech license for a long time. They also have, Rifts is probably their most well-known game. They also did Nightbane, Heroes Unlimited. They still have what they call After the Bomb, which was originally the game that had the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles license. I think there was a couple other ones, but I don't remember. They have Palladium Fantasy, which I have a copy of somewhere, but I haven't been able to find it in about 3 years. But yeah, that's kind of, Palladium, like I said, I would call it a hybrid system, kind of like if you took, the classic D100 and mashed it up with D&D, really. Right.
And then moving on from Palladium, just sort of moving down a list of games that sort of came to our minds. Cyberpunk, it's a D10 roll over system. So you're rolling a D10, you're adding your modifiers, you're trying to beat the score.
Mm-hmm.
Very much like D&D and Pathfinder, where you're rolling a D10 rather than a D20, but sort of the same concept. You have skills. They have a modifier next to them. You're rolling a D10, you're adding that modifier,
The notable difference, I think, is that where D&D and Pathfinder and Palladium also used a stat modifier. In other words, your stat is one number, and like your strength is a 16, so that's a +3. In Cyberpunk, you just add whatever number your stat is. There is no modifier number.
Right. Effectively, your stat is the modifier.
Yes.
It's not that there's not a stat number and not that there's not a modifier. It's that your stat number is your modifier and that's it. Like that's all there is to it.
Yeah, it's essentially it just takes a little step out of there, but it's not significant.
Right.
And like I said, I don't think we're really trying to get too in depth with all these and explain all the intricacies of the games, but also the engine used in Cyberpunk's also used for the Witcher RPG. It is modified a little bit here and there, but it's still the same basic. And to the best of anything I've heard, it will also be basically the engine in Cyberpunk Red as well. Again, some minor system tweaks, but same core mechanics.
Right. And I'm excited. Again, we'll be talking about Cyberpunk Red till it's here, and then probably after it's here.
Well, this should come out.
This will come out the week before it drops.
Yeah.
This episode will come out the 10th. It'll drop on the 14th and then the 19th, respectively.
Okay. So yeah, that's Cyberpunk. Then I guess what I would consider the classic dice pool systems, which would be the West End games, which most noticeably was used for Star Wars, although I know they also held a Men in Black license for a bit, and I believe they also had a Ghostbusters license for a bit.
Yeah. Why did I not know about that Men in Black license?
I only ever saw one copy of the book. But yeah, they did those, and theirs is a classic, what I would consider a classic dice pool system. D6s, and your stats and your skills were all classified as 2D plus 1. Okay, and I'm making that number up, but we'll say your stat is 2D plus 1 and your skill was 2D plus 2.
I'd just like to point out, just to side rail you real quick, there are 8 used copies of the Men in Black role-playing system on Amazon right now for $22.97.
Okay.
Just because I had to look it up.
Fair enough.
So you can get that.
I actually have a internet hack of a Jurassic Park game built on that engine.
Yeah. Sorry. You said Men in Black and my brain went, ooh.
Yeah. I remember reading it. A friend of mine had it, 25 years ago.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It says 1997, so yeah.
But essentially, yeah, to try and get back to where before my brain hit a bump, we'll say your stat is 2D and your skill is 2D plus 2. So you would grab 4 D6s, and you needed to make sure one of them was different than the other ones. Okay? That was we always called it the wild die. I don't know if there was an official name for it. So you would roll your 4 D6, and if your wild die came up a 6, it exploded. And you could re-roll that, and, if you rolled another 6, you rolled it again. Whatever you got done, you added everything up and added your plus 1 or your plus 2 or whatever it was, and that was your number. And then, your skills or your stats would increase, and they would go from, 2D to 2D plus 1 to 2D plus 2. But instead of going to 2D plus 3, they would go to 3D. At least I think. It might have been between 3 and 4. I don't remember. But and that was literally, your whole character sheet was a bunch of 4D plus 2 or, whatever your numbers were. And that was literally the whole mechanic of the game. Now, in more recent years, Russ Morrissey of EN World and so forth has put out a system called What's Old is New, which in my mind is very much kind of revision / love letter of the old West End system. And it's got a few extra mechanics in it, and you don't write things down in the same manner. You actually have numeric values for your stats and so forth, but it still represents so many dice, whatever, and you're still totaling up all the dice you roll, and that's your result. Again, against a target number. And to this day, I don't remember what the target number ranges were. I played the game a few times. Geez, I was 20, 19. Been a long time.
Right. And if you're looking for, let me actually double check that, but just a cursory Google search brings up that What's Old is New is actually running the Judge Dredd game and the Worlds of 2000 AD.
Yes, they are.
Which is actually really cool. And if you don't know what 2000 AD is, it's basically the French magazine that Judge Dredd came out of. And that's really awesome.
I thought it was British, not French, but
I know it's, let me say it this way. It's the European magazine that Judge Dredd came out of.
Yes, I would say this is I do know that it is the Judge Dredd of the comic books, not
right.
the movies.
Well, I'll tell you the truth. That last Judge Dredd movie is pretty close to the comics. It's not too far off.
I said the last one I saw was the Stallone one. So
Oh yeah, I highly recommend going out and watching that. It was just called Dread. It came out a couple of years ago, and it's really close to the comics.
oh,
It's
cool.
not spot on. There's a lot of stuff that's missing, but for some pretty like standard Judge Dredd fare, it's pretty close to the comics.
That's cool. Now the next one we had put down on our list here is Shadowrun. Do you know much about Shadowrun, Steve, or the mechanics of it?
I I know basically what I know of Shadowrun is that it's a dice pool system. I don't know a lot about Shadowrun. The reason I don't know a lot about Shadowrun is because anytime I looked into Shadowrun, I got immediately turned off because Shadowrun is cyberpunk with magic, and I'm not a big. We talked about this last time, but I'm not a big high fantasy person, and adding cyberpunk to high fantasy doesn't help me like it anymore.
That's fair. I don't think I've ever played Shadowrun. I am familiar with the system, and actually, they also, I don't know, I think it's been a while since the new edition of it's come out. There was also a fantasy game that ran on the same dice mechanic. It was called Earth Dawn. It's actually set in the same universe, but anyway, that's lore and other nerdology that we don't need to get into today. But Shadowrun is another dice pool system, although it's what I would call the other type of dice pool system where you have a target number. And a target number not in the context of the total, but in Shadowrun, you have, again, I'm sort of making this up because I don't know the specifics of the system, but we'll say you have a 2 in dexterity or operate or whatever, 2 in your stat, and a 2 in your skill, or we'll say 5 and 5 because that makes a little more sense because I think your numbers are a little higher in Shadowrun. But in any case, you'll take those two numbers, you add them together, you grab that many d6, and you roll them. And you're looking for sixes. And I believe the way it works is you're looking for a specific, so many sixes on a roll. And I believe the way it works is ones don't matter unless you have more ones than sixes, but I could be wrong there. But Shadowrun, specifically in some editions, was notorious for requiring practical buckets of d6 because sometimes you could be rolling 30 or 40 dice for a single check.
Yeah, so it's not sixes, it's actually fives.
Oh, is it fives and sixes?
Yeah, fives and sixes. It's 5+ is how it's often referred to.
Okay.
So I actually have the quick start for the 5th edition of Shadowrun brought up here.
Oh, I think I had that somewhere.
Yeah, it's free from actual website. So if you're looking to play some Shadowrun, you can pick up the quick start for free.
Do they have the 6th edition quick start out yet?
I don't know.
Because I know the
just grabbed
6th edition,
5th edition.
released a little over a year ago.
Let me take a look, but I don't think. I think it's just 5th edition is out.
Okay, but yeah, Shadowrun is cyberpunk plus magic, effectively.
Yeah.
But it has had quite a bit of support. There's a large community out there that really loves it. Never been my thing either because kind of like I like my cyberpunk and I do like some stuff with magic, but I don't necessarily need the two to meet.
No, I don't need cyber orcs. I'm sorry. It's just not something that I'm going, oh man, I really need that in my life.
Yeah, that's fair.
But yeah, it's fives and sixes, and it's a pretty neat system. It is known for needing buckets of dice. It is known for being crunchy in a lot of ways, even though it's not super crunchy, but it is crunchy in that like you are rolling a lot of dice way.
Well, I think what also happens is depending on what's happening, there are a lot of rolls that need to be made. So, like, you roll this, then you roll that, then the person you're attacking rolls something else, and you compare them, and da 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 da.
I know that I've listened to a couple Shadowrun actual plays, and unless they mute the dice, it's really distracting.
Fair enough.
Because all you hear is rolling dice. But Shadowrun's neat. If you're into looking into like science fiction and fantasy, go for it. Moving on from Shadowrun, we move down to Savage Worlds.
Savage Worlds, I've heard. I have not gotten to play it yet, but I've heard a lot of really good things about it. A lot of people speak highly of it, and one setting in particular I'd love to try is Deadlands.
Yeah, I know a lot of people. A lot of people love Deadlands. I never touched Savage Worlds myself. Not out of any malintent, just didn't have the time.
Yeah. Now I've looked at it a little bit enough to get a general feel for it. It is actually a universal system where your Savage Worlds core book is just rules and creation character creation rules and so forth. It doesn't really include a setting because it is intended to be a a multi-setting game. Be it Deadlands. I know they actually do have an official version for the Rift setting from Palladium in Savage Worlds, along with, I know there's a ton of them. I don't know the names of many of them really. Their dice system is kind of unique in that it's it's a dice pool system, sort of. The way it works is you'll have your stat value will be a die size, your skill value will be a die size. So you could have, we'll say, a d6 in, we'll say you're playing a fantasy setting, and you have a d6 in maybe strength or whatever the appropriate stat is to attack with a sword, and you have a d8 in swords. So you take a d6 and a d8, and then because you're what they call a wild card as a player character, you grab another d6 and you roll all three of those. And you want any one of those usually to come up 4 or higher. However, the higher your highest number is, the better. And again, like I mentioned with the Star Wars dice, or the one die in Star Wars in Savage Worlds, it's any of them. If that die comes up on its maximum face, be it a 6 on a d6, an 8 on a d8, etc., you roll it again and you add it to its previous thing. And if you manage to roll 10 tens in a row, you can roll 107 on a d10, 1d10. Now that would be rather improbable, but what I have heard of Savage World is a lot of people say it's really good for fast-paced action.
Yeah, I've heard that myself. I've heard a lot of people say that Savage Worlds works really well for the fast-paced, fast-moving action adventure stuff.
Mm-hmm. I have heard it can be really swingy in terms of stuff. If stuff starts going bad, it can go very bad very fast. Or also you can get where the PCs get lucky and take down a bad guy in one shot. So that is what it is. Like I said, it is a system I'm rather curious to test out at some point, but I have not as of yet got the chance to.
Yeah, I want to get my hands on it. I want to try it out, look a little bit deeper into it, play with it some, just because it is a really interesting system.
Yeah.
And then Green Ronin's
adventure game engine is what they call it.
Yeah, the AGE engine.
Okay. So I know they use it for, I believe they have the Dragon Age game. It's used for the Expanse. They have a Modern Age, and I think they have like a Fantasy Age.
Mm-hmm.
They have actually a rather unique dice mechanic that I kind of like, in that it does a lot with relatively, like they get a lot out of a single roll. The way it works, because I actually spent some time researching this yesterday, you roll 3d6, and then you you roll 3d6 plus your ability, and then if you have what they call a focus, which is kind of like a skill in most games, you add an additional +2, and that's versus a target number, which according to the quick start guide that I was reading can be anywhere from 7 to 21. One thing, kind of like Star Wars, you do want one of these d6 to be different somehow so that you can tell it apart from the other two, and that is what you're going to call, depending on the version of the game, they call it a stunt die, a drama die, or a dragon die.
Mm-hmm.
What that does is that is used for degree of success or failure depending on whether you beat the target number or not. So you roll your dice, you add them all together, and that determines whether you succeed or fail, but then the face that turns up on the unique die is kind of like how well you did, which, like I said, I thought was rather unique.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. As a quick aside, Green Ronin on their website, on Green Ronin Store, has the Green Ronin Quick Start Bundle, which is Dragon Age, Modern Age, and The Expanse Quick Starts, all for free.
Yeah, I got them off of drive-through, but yeah.
I just downloaded them from their website, so.
Oh, cool. Now, the other thing they do, though, is in combat, it works, again, a little bit differently, but not totally, because your chances of rolling an 18 on a 3d6 are a lot lower than rolling a 20 on a d20. So to have criticals to work that way isn't that effective. But what they do is your basic combat mechanic works just like the skill mechanic we just described, but instead of the dragon die affecting how well you do, the way it works is that if you have any of your dice come up as a pair, in other words, 2 2s, 2 4s, 2 1s, whatever, you get stunt points equal to the number of the face that's up on the dragon die. And then you can spend those stunt points to do cool things like knock them prone or cause a serious wound or all kinds of fun stuff. So, like I said, they're using a very simple die roll, but they're actually using different parts of it to do a lot of things.
Yeah, that is. I know a lot of people really like the age system.
I like it simply for the fact that they took a very simple mechanic and stretched it, so to speak. They do a lot with one single roll instead of making you roll and then roll again and then roll again.
Right. And that's nice. I can understand, that's where it gets annoying, is where you roll and roll and roll and roll and roll. Like, not that I don't like rolling dice, but going to make me roll 3 times to do one thing is kind of frustrating.
Yeah.
So then we're into the D100 system, the sort of that end of things.
Mm-hmm. Now, D100, I think, at least what's kind of credited as the first one is Chaosium's BRP system, or basic roleplay, which powers Call of Cthulhu, RuneQuest. I believe it powers Pendragon.
I think you're right. I think it does power Pendragon, because I remember hearing that.
Well, I know Pendragon was Greg Stafford's kind of pet project, and I know he was, one of the founders of Chaosium and did a lot of stuff with the systems. And BRP is, for the most part, dirt simple, skill-based. You have a percentage, you try and roll under it. There may be a few modifiers here and there. Most of the time, I believe crits are 10% of your number. So in other words, if you have a 70 to get a crit, you need to roll 0.7 or lower. That's classic BRP, is roll lower the better.
Right. Yeah, that BRP system is a roll under. It's, having played with it in Delta Green, it's really nice. I really like that system.
Yeah, Delta Green is a little bit different than true BRP, but it's very closely based on it, and that's where it came out of. Minor differences being that Delta Green uses a different system for crits, and that Delta Green does crits on doubles instead of a percentage of your total. So it's a little bit less mathy in a lot of ways, because it's real easy to see an 11 as opposed to, well, is this, you know what I mean?
Right.
But that's it. And Delta Green also does use, in the case of opposed rolls, uses a blackjack style mechanic, where if it's opposed rolls, the higher roll that doesn't go over the skill wins. Kind of like The Price is Right, I guess, too.
Right.
And then, Warhammer Fantasy, at least the 4th edition, I believe 1st and 2nd edition, were also D100. Although they do things differently in certain regards, I know they use success levels as opposed to complex, or not complex, but levels in with, did you roll under half or 20% or whatever. And I know they calculate it 2 different ways. The simplest one I've heard is what they call the fast SL, or fast success level, which again is basically utilizing a blackjack mechanic on the roll. And so let's say you have 45 in your attack skill. So you roll, ideally you want to roll as close to your target number as you can without going over, because let's say you roll a 41, that gives you 4 success levels. And then that affects other things for damage, and that system can be really crunchy, at least what I've heard it played. I've not had a chance to read it myself yet. But as far as just basic success failure, it's very simple. D100 is very easy to understand at its core. Depending on the add-ons and so forth put in with it, it can be a little more complicated.
Right. And then we move into the freely publishing stuff. You're talking about Twilight 2000, Forbidden Lands,
Mutant Year Zero, Alien.
Right. Tales from the Loop, which I'm hearing wonderful things about Tales from the Loop.
I don't know if Forbidden Lands uses what they call their Year Zero engine, but I could be wrong.
I don't know. I want to talk about Tales from the Loop because that's a game that I've had my eye on, because anybody who's listened to this podcast for any period of time knows I'm a very visual person.
Mm-hmm.
So art catches my eye before anything. And
Mm-hmm.
Tales from the Loop has some of the most, what I think is the most gorgeous art in an RPG I think I've ever seen. Just these beautiful landscapes depicting images that are just awesome. And there's actually going to be an Amazon Prime show based off of Tales from the Loop. But I'm so, want to get my hands on this game. It's really cool.
If I'm not mistaken, I believe Tales from the Loop is actually a game based off of the artwork. Like the artwork inspired the game.
Right, it did. And Tales from the Loop also started as a board game and then turned into a role-playing game.
Okay.
Because people were like, no, the board game's great, but we want more. Yeah, it's so cool.
That's fair. I've not looked at Tales from the Loop much personally. I was reading a little bit of the Mutineer Zero starter pack yesterday.
Yeah, Mutineer Zero is really cool. Going back to Forbidden Lands has always been a really interesting game setting.
Yeah, Free League's been putting out some neat stuff.
Obviously the Alien RPG, which, we've talked about before.
Mm-hmm. Their Year Zero engine is another dice pool system, but it's actually a little bit different than any of the other ones we've talked about. That's why I wanted to bring it up. You have a skill value, you have an attribute value. Sometimes you have a gear bonus. You add them together. You roll that many d6s. And essentially, you're looking to get at least 1 6. Now, you don't want to roll ones, but most of the time, as I understand it from the quick skim I was able to give it, the other day, it doesn't matter a great deal most of the time. Sometimes ones can make bad things happen. And while that sounds like it can be a really success common system, in talking to some people who played it quite a bit, see, it doesn't actually work that way in practice. And the other thing is there are mechanics for what they call pushing rolls that can lead to you taking effectively attribute damage, even though it's only temporary. So it can turn into a pretty gritty spiral very fast.
I would imagine. And you can tell that system lends itself for gritty games and gritty spirals. I mean, Free League Publishing, when you look at that list of games that we just talked about, none of those games are very happy-go-lucky. The closest would be with Tales, but even it's a little bit darker than just what's on its surface. I mean, your Forbidden Lands has always been a dark, gritty game.
Mm-hmm.
And, the core of Mutineer Zero is just, oh man, that's a really cool game too.
Yeah.
Free League Publishing also puts out Morkborg.
Yeah, they do distribute it for Stockholm Cartel, I think is the name of the outfit, the guys that wrote it.
We've been trying to figure, I'm just going to shoehorn it in here because we have been talking about Morkborg for, 3 weeks now?
Something like that.
Because we have been trying to figure out how to bring up this game. Because this is not at all a game that, if you have anybody who is weak-stomached or younger, this is a very dark, gritty game. It's very, its art style is...
It is Scandinavian death metal meets RPG.
Yeah, and if you know it, well, I mean, that pretty much says it all. It's Scandinavian death metal meets RPG, and oh man, I like it.
I listened to an interview the other last week with the guys that put it out, and I know it got a lot of credit for its layout and design, and the guy who actually did the layout and design, that is what he does for a living. But he said part of what he did when making the book was intentionally did things that you're not supposed to do.
Well, and the book's not laid out like a standard RPG.
Okay, I haven't actually gotten a chance to look at it yet, other than just kind of like seeing it online.
The book's laid out. It's not laid out like a standard RPG. It sort of reminds me of... I don't know how to describe it. It's a lot of art with a little bit of text, is the best way I could probably say it.
Okay.
There's a lot of... The layout of the book is very modern, and I like it. I like the layout, and I like the way that everything is laid out in that book, because it's not your standard, like, you open Pathfinder. Pathfinder is laid out almost exactly what you think it would be laid out like. There's a little bit of art here, there's a little bit of art there. There's a lot of information about what to do, how to play the game, all that stuff. Morkborg has a lot more art, a little bit less text, but it still gets everything you need to know across. Man, that's a cool game. Man, that's a game that you gotta have. It is a very 18 plus game. You gotta have adults to play it.
I know it's very, very gritty. Like, it's not, so to speak, when you die. It's how soon and how spectacularly.
Well, I think the pitch, the one sentence description that they have on Free League's website says it all. It's a doom metal album of a game, a spiked flail to the face, light on rules, heavy on everything else.
It does sound kind of fun.
It does, doesn't it? It sounds like the kind of game we talked about music when we talked about horror games, but it sounds like the kind of game that I would throw on some pretty heavy music in the background and we're just gonna sit down and have a blast. I really got to get my hands on this and get it played. So moving on from sort of Free League stuff and the Mutant Year Zero stuff, let's talk about Slay Industries again.
I'd say that kind of ties in with the whole metal thing. We brought that up before. It's kind of a metal take on Cyberpunk in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it really is.
They use what I would consider to be quite a unique dice mechanic, a little bit like Green Ronin's Age, but different in the same way. And this will be the dice mechanic in their second edition, which, as I recall, the first edition didn't use the degree of success modifiers that the second edition will be, and that this is based on their quick start. Also, this will be the system used in the just recently announced Terminator RPG that they're doing. But the way it works is you have, hang on, I wrote this down. Where did I put the notes? Oh, here we go. Basically, your stat can be anywhere from a 0 to a 6. Your skill can be anywhere from a 0 to a 4. You're going to add those together, and you're going to roll some d10s trying to get to a target number, which usually is going to be somewhere between a 4 and a 16. Now, it's a little bit more complicated than some of the other ones. You're going to have one of your d10s is going to be different than the rest of them. They're recommending, I believe it's 5. You need 6 total d10. One different one, and then 5 that are whatever. So what you do, you take your special d10. That is your success die. Then you add however many ranks you have in the appropriate, the skill that you're rolling. Grab that many die and grab one more. So we'll say you have 2 ranks in a skill. So you're going to grab your success die and 3 more d10. You're going to roll all 4. You're going to look at the total on your success die and see if you beat the target number. So that determines whether you succeeded or failed. Your degree of success failure is how many of those other dies succeeded or failed. So it's a little bit crunchy in some ways, but it's not horrendous really, because you're just going, okay, I need to get a 15 and I'm plus 5. We'll say, well, that's not a good example. We'll say I need to get a 10 and I'm plus 5. So I know I need to have at least a 5 on the die. Not as simple as some games, but it's a different take on it, and I do kind of like systems that have a degree of success mechanic in them. You can do that with D&D, but that entails, okay, you beat the target number by this many, so we'll say it's this good of a success, and yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, Slay Industries. Man, we've talked about Slay Industries so much. It's on my list. It's on the short list.
The setting is just, it's unique in a lot of ways. The setting and the core concept of the game, I don't know of another one out there that is like it.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, that dice system is really nice. It's just on the short list. It's just one of those games that's like, I gotta get something. There's a lot of games I have on my short list at the moment, but it's Slay Industries is like, currently it's, I've been talking about, since you told me about it, Mutant City Blues, and then it's Slay Industries, and like, you know what I mean? Like, it's literally that short of a list right now. Is like, Mutant City Blues has to get fired. Then I want to play Slay Industries. Then I want to get my hands on Morkborg and get it out there and played. Mm-hmm. And then other stuff.
I'm trying to read like 4 or 5 different games at the same time right now. And, I get no time to actually do that, because then there's other things, it's like this podcast. I love doing a podcast, and I like doing, looking up stuff for the podcast. But it's like, wait a minute, this is time that I could be spending reading a game book, but
Yeah.
then the podcast is an excuse to look for more cool games to want to read. So,
Well, yeah, and I'm just gonna cut to it. I wouldn't have read any of the Powered by the Apocalypse stuff if I hadn't have been for the podcast. So let's talk about Powered by the Apocalypse.
okay.
It's a very, and we've talked about this before, it's a very, very light system. It does do things a little bit differently, because I have the book up here in front of me. I have the original book, which is Apocalypse World,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm trying to get to, I was trying to see where the dice is. It's a weird...
Gonna say, I know there are some variations on Powered by the Apocalypse out there too, and I'm not even gonna try and list the number of games that are powered by the Apocalypse because it's a very popular system or framework right now with a lot of indie game publishers. Magpie puts out a lot of stuff with that. Obviously, Evil Hat puts out quite a bit as well.
And like reading it is a little bit difficult, but it's a D12 system.
D12?
12 from what I can gather.
Okay, that's most of the versions of it I've heard. I thought used 2d6. Not all of
These
them, though.
numbers seem wrong for a 2d6, but it's possible.
Well, it could be a different variation on it.
It is possible because the numbers that they're talking about seem like they're talking about, from what I'm skimming over this, trying to remind myself of how it works, but they're talking about a 12 plus, they're talking about 10s and 11s, 7 through 9, and on 2d6, I guess that's possible.
Well, I believe...
That'd be closer than a D12 system. You're right. It is 2d6.
I believe you add, like, if you have 2 ranks in...
Right, you do add modifiers to that.
So it'd be 2d6 plus 2 or whatever.
Right. Like I said, it's one of the things that definitely is with Powered by the Apocalypse is a lot of people say that once you get it rolling, once you start rolling dice, it gets to be a really simple game to just grab and go.
Yeah, I know, like I said, it's very popular now. Another game that we were going to try and bring up, and I'm going to tie it in here because the Forged in the Dark system, which is Blades in the Dark, Band of Blades, Scum and Villainy, etc., as I understand it, is effectively really a variant on Powered by the Apocalypse, just does the dice a little differently. And in that game, I believe you roll a various number of d6s, but you only count the highest one. And then I believe Cult is another larger title. It's Powered by the Apocalypse, but I believe they use D10s, not D6s. So,
and that's KULT.
Yes, that is a very dark adult horror game, but kind of interesting in a lot of ways.
Mud and Blood's playing it currently.
Yeah. I think they're going to wrap it up fairly shortly. I don't know how much longer they have on it, but yeah, it's actually a pretty good AP. I don't know how much of it you listened to, but
I caught like episode 2 and was mad.
Okay.
Because it like my app downloaded episode 2 but didn't download episode 1, and I was like, oh man, I like it when they play things, and I wanted to listen to this.
Yeah, I think episode 10 is the most recent one that released on that.
Yeah, I'll have to. It's one of those. I'll just have to go back.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's talk about Fate, since we sort of touched on Forged in the Dark and we touched on PBTA.
Yeah. Fate is another one. I think it's narrative heavy. Fate uses special dice, sort of. I know they're D6 shaped. I believe they have 2 faces with a minus sign on them, 2 faces that are blank, and 2 faces with a plus sign on them. I could be completely wrong, but I know those are the faces that are on the die. And I wrote something down about Fate, too. Let me find it. Okay. You roll 4 Fate dice, then you add your skill rating, and basically your positive symbols count as a plus, your negative symbols count as a negative. It's basically a bell curve D4. I think is kind of what they're going for. But how much you beat the other roll by or your target number affects how well you do. And there's I don't want to call them charts, but there's mechanisms in the game that tell you how good of a success or whether, let's say you succeed but at a cost. There's options outlined in the book, much like PBTA and some of the options in their playbooks.
Let me ask, is Fate crunchy?
I would say no. I know it's considered more of a narrative-heavy game. I've never had any experience with it. I do know the Fate core book is free on drive-thru, and I do have a copy of it, but it's not been on the list of things that I actually have, what do you want to say, actively tried to read because, well, there are just other things that I want to read more.
The only reason I ask that is because as I was looking up Fate dice, typically they're sold in 12 packs. There's a couple that are just 4 packs, but typically Fate dice, like on Amazon, are sold in 12 packs. And I asked that because I was like, well, typically games that sell 12 dice at a clip are kind of, at least, I want to come up with a different term other than crunchy for for games that use a lot of dice. Maybe we'll call it clacky.
Okay, it says Fate dice, at least 4, preferably 4 per person.
Oh, okay.
Yes, and it is 2 sides with a plus sign, 2 sides with a minus sign, and 2 sides blank. So you theoretically could play them with regular D6s. You just have to remember which ones are which.
Right.
And then you have fate points that you can spend to do things. And again, we're not trying to break down the systems completely, more just kind of give you an overview of how playing something works. So fate is definitely going to be more narrative and less crunchy in terms of, no real math involved or not anything significant.
Right. That's funny. The Fate dice are also sold as fudge dice, which I know fudge dice. I like fudge dice. They're fun.
Well, that was, I think, originally, it actually mentions that in the book. Yeah, sometimes sold under their original name, fudge dice.
Yeah, because fudge dice were sold as a DM tool. There was a game associated with them, but fudge dice were typically used where you rolled the plus or minus, and it was like you rolled your d20, you rolled your fudge dice, and then you rolled maybe another d6.
Ah, okay.
And you did this as a way to be like d20 plus 4.
Okay, that makes sense.
I always liked fudge dice. They're silly. Because it's also a way to make your players sweat because they hear you rolling more dice.
Well, it really only leaves us with 2 that they put down on our list. One being Gumshoe, which I did do a little research on. I did find out they actually have a document for download on their website. I may put a link to it in the show notes that explains the core of the Gumshoe system. But the Gumshoe system really is a more narrative-heavy system as well. And kind of the core premise of Gumshoe is that it's designed for investigative games where you're not depending on a roll for the players to find a clue that is the key to the mystery that they're trying to figure out or whatever. And so you do have point pools that you can spend from to achieve certain effects and so on and so forth, but die rolls are usually only a single d6 versus a target number that's usually it's saying 4. So again, as far as if you're looking for a system that is very minimal math, I would say Gumshoe would be probably right up your alley. That's used for games that we've mentioned like Night's Black Agents, Fall of Delta Green, Mutant City Blues, primarily
Trail of Cthulhu.
Yeah, stuff done by Pelgrane Press, basically.
Yeah, Gumshoe is it's not, but a lot of people refer to it as the Pelgrane Press engine.
Well, it was developed by Robin Laws, and I don't think he's worked for anyone else for quite some time.
Yeah, and like I said, it is often just referred to as the Pelgrane Press engine.
Mm-hmm.
Gumshoe's really nice. I've played with Gumshoe a little bit, not actually run it, but I've played with it.
Okay.
I think it's really cool because it allows room for more investigative games versus action-based games.
Mm-hmm.
So Gumshoe is definitely the one where, so like Trail of Cthulhu is investigating Cthulhu, less, like Delta Green or Call of Cthulhu is like your standard. Delta Green's a little bit more of a variation, but Call of Cthulhu is your standard telling a Cthulhu story. Trail of Cthulhu is more like the video game Shadow of Innsmouth.
Okay.
Where you're sort of looking into what happened. Why is there just a town of fish people? You know what I mean? Like, what is the deal with this weird place or weird occurrence? You're playing more detective type stuff rather than like the horror unfolding around you. It's more of looking into why is this here? What is going on here?
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of people we like on the show, Kenneth Haidt wrote Trail of Cthulhu.
Yeah, Ken's done a lot of work with Pelgrane recently. He wrote Trail of Cthulhu, he wrote Fall of Delta Green, he wrote Night's Black Agents, and that, well, ironically, turns to another game that Ken Haidt worked on, which was the last one on our list, which was, he did a good amount of work on the last edition of Vampire the Masquerade.
Yeah, Vampire has been a staple in the RPG genre for a long time.
Mm-hmm. I remember when it first got big back in mid to late 90s.
Yeah.
I do know, I don't know a lot about the new editions, though. It is my understanding that their core dice mechanic is still pretty much the same. And that's across, at least it used to be across most of the titles, be it, Werewolf, Mage, Changeling, etc. And there, it's another dice pool system.
D10s.
But D10s, and going for how many you can get over, as I recall, you wanted seven on the die or higher is what sticks in my head. But that could be wrong, or that number could fluctuate. I don't remember. But it's still just a thing where you're looking at the dice and going, okay, it's over this, so it counts. It's not, it doesn't count.
6 or higher on dice is a success. And then the number of those that you have counts for the number of successes that you have, and it's sort of a...
I say that's more or less how I remember it.
Yeah, Vampire's been a staple in the RPG genre for a long time for a reason. It's a very easy game that's different from D&D in a lot of ways, but a very easy game to just sit down, grab, and start playing. I know, Vampire, Werewolf, the storyteller system is often what it's referred to as.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know Vampire is very popular in the LARP community.
Mm-hmm.
And I know Vampire's a great game. Like, it really is.
It was never my thing, but I think it was more the vampire thing was just, at the time, it was kind of really trendy because Interview with a Vampire had just come out, and I was kind of like, yeah, whatever, okay, it's popular, I don't want to like it.
Right.
Like Werewolf, I always thought was kind of interesting.
One of the things that I've always felt the Vampire does really well is their combat's really good, and how they do cover, how they do ranged combat, so guns and that type of stuff is really, really well done. And I like a book with a lot of really simple, easy to read charts. It's been my biggest complaint with 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, is that I think 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons is laid out kind of, how do I put this? I don't want to say poorly. It is laid out more to be read and less to be skimmed. And I'm very much a person that wants to skim through, get to what I need, and then move on.
Mm-hmm.
And Vampire does lots of bullet points, lots of charts, lots of easy to read, quick, get it together, how to play the game, how to do the thing, and you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that sounds cool. Like I said, I played the game some, years ago. Haven't really tried to read the books in a long, long time. Yeah, I mean, I at this point I could be persuaded to possibly do something in one of their systems, even to run it, to play it again. Like I said last episode, yeah, if I've got the time, I'll probably play it if I can make it.
Yeah, no, I understand completely. But with that, I think that brings us to the end of our list.
Yeah, now you will notice we did kind of leave one kind of big thing out, and it's we didn't mention the Star Wars game that's currently out by Fantasy Flight Games, or its companion Genesis, that uses what they call the narrative dice, which are sort of like fate dice in that they have symbols on them instead of numbers.
And we did that specifically because we hate the Genesis. No.
We did do it on purpose, though. But not because we hate it. It's actually a system both of us are interested in. What's really unique about it is that it actually, so to speak, you get, I would call it a 3-axis result on a single die roll, in that you have both success, failure, advantage, threat, and triumph and despair that can all come out of one die roll. But it is a little bit different and something that's not the easiest to explain, and we felt like it's enough different that we didn't want to just kind of stumble through it like you've heard us doing with some of these systems that we haven't played tonight. So next week, we're actually going to have another guest on. We've been able to wrangle GM Chris, who some of you, if you're Star Wars RPG nuts, know from the Order 66 podcast, or also from the Forge podcast, which is a podcast dedicated to the Genesis RPG. But he's been in gaming for a long time, has done a lot of work, was actually a credited playtester for the Genesis RPG, and like I said, he's been involved with that game for a very long time, knows it extremely well, and he's going to join us next week to kind of explain it a whole lot better than we ever could.
Right. And I'm really excited to have GM Chris on. I'm a fan of the Forge, and I've wanted to learn about the Genesis dice system for quite a while now. It's just, in my opinion, the best way to learn a system and the best way to learn how to play a system is to have somebody who played it explain how to play the game to you.
Mm-hmm.
And GM Chris really knows his stuff, so we're excited to have him on the podcast.
Yes.
So with that and that bombshell, let's move into...
Is it time for Game of the Week?
Yeah, it's time for Game of the Week.
Oh, boy. It's my favorite.
Game of the week. Game of the week.
All right, whose turn is it to go first for Game of the Week this week?
Your turn.
Oh, it's mine? Okay. Well, I'm going to go, given that we were talking about it earlier, I'm going with a Powered by the Apocalypse game this week. It's a game called City of Mist. And it is think of a film noir superpowered action setting. Kind of, what brought to mind was kind of like Daredevil without all the combat, or the heck was the Green Arrow. Again, without as much combat, but seems really interesting. They have a free quick start. It's put out by Son of Oak Game Studio. Quick start comes with 7 playbooks, 2 adventures, cases, whatever, and a bunch of stuff. So you can just slap it on the table and play it. The quick start is a free download from drive-through. Like I said, looks like something that could be really quite fun. Modern setting. But again, doesn't require a lot of investment to learn, so to speak.
Right, that looks really cool. I mean, it's powered by the Apocalypse, so as we sort of discussed earlier, it is one of those games that you can get your hands on. And
yeah, I said there's also actually a lot of stuff out there for it. There's a lot of supplements.
Just a cursory glance, and I was actually finding a lot of information on that.
Mm-hmm.
So my game of the week, just to keep the theme running from last episode, it's actually my Secrets of the Crucible, which is the Keyforge setting for Genesis. Keyforge was a card game, and it actually has a really interesting fantasy setting. It's the art style I would describe as whimsical, and I'm kind of interested in seeing what an RPG based off of a card game would look like. I've always been interested to see what an RPG based off Magic the Gathering would look like, and I guess that's called Dungeons and Dragons now, but it's just it's an interesting setting. It's, again, set in that Genesis system, which we don't really have a lot of experience in, but can really do wonders for narrative games, and this seems like a very narrative-focused game.
Mm-hmm. I would say I've played the Keyforge card game once or twice with a mutual friend of ours, but yeah, it seems like I've called them kitchen sink setting, but sort of intentionally that way. There's a little bit of everything.
Yeah, it does feel very everything's here, but that's okay. I don't have a problem with that. Just because of what the art style is and what the tone they're going for is, it seems really not super lighthearted, but it seems lighthearted. It seems a little more kid friendly. It just seems like a nice setting to play a game in.
Yeah, well, I think, like you said, whimsical seems like an appropriate word.
Yeah, whimsical. But with that, I think we sort of move to the end of the episode.
Yeah.
So we want to remind you, go out, like the Facebook, follow us on Twitter @andrpgs, find us on Discord.
Yep, we should be getting links to that up in the show notes now. Took us a little while to figure out how to do all that.
Yeah, to get some stuff squared away. So show notes, we'll have the links to everything. You can find us on TikTok, believe it or not, because I'm going to be posting some content on there just periodically.
We should post our blooper reels to TikTok.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Just be me screen recording an Audacity file. But yeah, you can find us on TikTok at meandsteverpgs. Just check us out. Tell your friends, and be kind to one another.
Yes. Be kind to one another. Go play some RPGs, and just because hello to the 6 people internationally who have listened to us so far.
Yeah. Hello to those international listeners of ours.
Yes. So say this week I noticed we got one hit from Ireland, 2 from the UK, 1 from India, and 1 from South Africa.
Yeah. So Yeah, hello to you folks, because
Yes.
and if you're one of those people, hit us up on Facebook, Discord, tell us how you found our show, because I'd love to know.
Yeah. Yeah, I would.
That's not sarcasm. Genuinely would love to know how you found us and what you think of us. Please
Yes.
tell us what you think of us. If you don't like us, go leave a bad review. It's okay. You're not going to hurt my feelings. Or, I mean, maybe I should tell you it will hurt my feelings. I don't know. Some people, that's what they look for. They're like, oh man, I'm not going to hurt this guy's feelings. Well, I told you, so this sums up my personality in a nutshell. I was telling you a work story, and I said it was one of the worst insults I've ever gotten. It was hilarious.
Well, yeah, everybody be kind to each other. Go play some RPGs.
Intro and outro music by the band 12 Noon. You can email us at meandsteverpg@gmail.com. You can also find us at facebook.com/meandsteverpg. Thank you, and be kind to each other.
How much for the cigar?
Cigar, $20, dog. You gotta go down the street to the store and buy that.
I had to get my audacity brought up. That's what that noise was.
Is apparently the noise of reaching to click things now.
Yeah.
Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, and Smurf toppings.